So, Mark, were you just kind of given like pretty much free reign to set up things as you saw fit when you moved in there?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it was a funny setup because there was sort of two parallel projects, and initially, if I'm honest, I don't think it was clear what our roles would be. So Ian was hired as head of design on the twins project. So this was the two new twins that came out eventually in 2018, the Interceptor and the GT 650. And I was hired as sort of like a project manager or program manager, sort of to run the whole project. And we did that for 6 months. And a lot of that first 6 months was just exactly that, was hiring a team. So hiring a team of engineers. I hired a guy off the buggy project that I talked about, and there was another guy that came from the engine side of that, came to the business and became head of engines at Royal Enfield, which I think was a fantastic move. A chap called James Young, who is just a brilliant engine designer. And we hired a bunch of engineers, and it was kind of a case of, I didn't really know what I was doing, so I hired one engineer, and then he said, okay, that chap's good, and we built up a team like that. And we hired designers, people that I knew, people that were good. So we hired a chap called Adrian Sellers, who Adrian's really, really talented guy, worked at GK Design, and then worked at Kawasaki US, and then came over, was at Honda Rome, and then came to us. So we hired Adrian, we hired a chap called Steve Everett. So Steve's a real old school designer. Worked with us on a few projects, did the Foggy Patronus bikes, did a bunch of work for Suzuki back in the day, but also did a load of car stuff, worked on the Hennessy Venom, and did a load of stuff on for, I think he was at Peugeot and other places, but really, really good guy, knows his stuff, is very, very good. And we just built a team. We just built a team around us. We took some chaps from secondment from India and set that up the other way around. And then, as I say, about 6 months into it, Siddharth said to me, I'd like you to take over as head of product strategy. And so I sat down and said, look, I've not done that as a thing before. I have a clear vision on what I think product should be, but I don't have any formal training in this, and we've done a lot of design research in as a business, and we'd already done a lot of design research for Royal Enfield. So we'd again, self-taught, we'd bought books and gone to seminars and kind of learned about research through that. And but I'd still say today I'm not qualified in product strategy. But I said to Sid, well, I don't know what I'm doing, and he was like, yeah, but I think I'm really keen that you do this. Well, you're the boss, so okay. And I said, as long as I can put a team around me that know what they're doing. So again, we hired a bunch of really good people, experienced people. We got people from Ducati, from Triumph, from Hero Honda in India, from Bajaj, from all over. And the idea being, my attitude was, well, let's get a real breadth of experience and just sort of build a best practice approach. Take nuggets of information from all those people and build a team, and let's not have any preconception. Let's start with well, how do we think the best way to do this is? Let's be design led. Let's be iterative. Let's really think about the process from the consumer point of view. And I'm a huge believer that customers don't think like designers and engineers. So if you say to a customer, what do you want on that bike? They're not going to give you specs. They don't, I remember a scenario where somebody had written down, a target volume for a fuel tank, 15 litres, and we were there making a clay model, and it was 14.5 litres, and we ended up adding on half a millimetre to try and hit the 15 litres, and thinking nobody's ever walked into a showroom and said, oh, I love that bike, I've got to own that bike, I need that bike in my life. No, it's only got 14.5 litres, not 15. That won't do it for me. The customers just don't think like that. They don't have numbers in their head when they fall in love with a bike, especially not Royal Enfield customers, who buy the bikes for for their character and the way they look and feel. And so, we set about the process of defining new products and setting up a methodology that is all about trying to do it from understanding how would the customer talk about this, what's the words they would use, going, meeting them, riding with them, being in their house, seeing where they have breakfast, seeing where they leave their helmet, riding with them, trying to keep up with them through the traffic, through Indian traffic or in Brazil or wherever they are, and understanding what are the jobs that need to be done for them, what are the jobs they need to do in a practical, pragmatic sense, like I need to get to work on this bike, but also what are the emotional jobs that need to be done, what are the social jobs, how does this make me feel, how does it make me look to others, how does it turn me on, excite me, fascinate me, they're the questions that I think if you want to create a product that people absolutely fall in love with, absolutely want and desire, and you've got to nail those things, you've got to get those right. And so we, as I say, set up a process of building this team. We built a little concept engineering component within that as well, and started to grow the team. And then again, I guess another 6 months after that, there was a bit of a reshuffle within the teams, and I was asked if I'd sit over both industrial design and product strategy. So that's my role today, is that I sit over both of them. So Ian is still head of the UK studio, and Siva is the head of the India studio. So, there's this continuity that has been there for 20 years now between the three of us, and it's fantastic. And they're both brilliant friends and just brilliant at what they do. Which means that I can be quite hands off on the design side of things. I mean, which I miss drawing. I miss making things with my hands, but I still get a lot of input, and I still ultimately decide whether we're going to go with something or not. Although I'm a great believer that you don't hire experts and then tell them how to do it. I think you need to give
Steve
people
Jobs quote,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the analogy that I always use is you don't go into a doctor's and say, I've got a headache, doctor, amputate my arm. You go to doctors and say, right, I've got a headache. What do you prescribe? You're the expert. You tell me what I should do. And for me, that's absolutely crystal clear that I don't hire a bunch of people and then tell them what to do. I'm sure they'll tell you I do, and I'm sure I do interfere, and there are little idiosyncrasies where I come along and have a taste thing and I say, I think it should be like this, and everybody else thinks, what on earth is he talking about? But I try my best to give the team freedom, and we've built, so into that team, we've now obviously got there's a range of sub-functions that sit. So we've got a full CGI team now. So we do all of the content creation within the team as well. So we create statics and animations, visuals for product launches. We do a lot of we've got a fully 3D online configurator for configuring the bikes. And a lot of the sort of photo retouching side. We've obviously got a full team of cast modelers, clay modelers, industrial designers, concept engineering and product managers that all sit within my team. And I think when I was first asked to do it, I was a bit skeptical. I was kind of like, I don't know why I'm being asked to do this. And I kind of thought maybe it was a mistake. I thought there's a conflict of interest here between industrial design and product strategy. I'm going to have to wear two hats. And at times I do. At times I've got an industrial designer saying this absolutely matters. We must do this. And then I've got sourcing saying this is going to be the price, and the product manager saying we can't afford that price. We cannot have that. And I have to kind of decide which of those things is going to matter most to the customer. But now looking back on it, I think, and you'd have to ask Siddharth himself, but I think the reason for that was to ensure that we had a design-led business. That Royal Enfield is predominantly about being design-led, about creating product that people want. And yeah, I'm sure lots of people will tell you it doesn't work. Lots of people will tell you it does. But I think we're certainly creating some fantastic bikes at the moment. I'm really proud of the stuff that we've got coming out at the moment, and it's a hugely exciting time to be in the company, because it's this. When you think about it, I mean, I don't know how much you know about the history of Royal Enfield.
I don't really know anything. I mean, to be honest with you, I know that there's been it seems like there's been a bit of a revival the last sort of 5 years. At least from the outside looking in, I haven't paid that much attention, but I've noticed that they've got some pretty decent looking bikes for not a lot of money. And there's this Indian connection, and that's
So
as much as I know.
indulge my Dilbertness now, because I bloody love the story of Royal Enfield, and I mean I'll do it as quick as I can, and you can edit out the stuff that's rubbish. So
no, it's all staying in.
So basically, and we have a brand historian, a fellow called Gordon May, who is incredible, knows all this stuff to such detail, and then he'll tell you the whole story, and he'll talk about a specific bike, and then he'll finish by saying, "I've got that bike in my bedroom now as well." He's ridden overland to India a couple of times and he's a fantastic guy. Anyway, so anything I say will definitely be wrong, and he could correct me, but I'll try. So, company started in like the 1850s, so that's how far it goes back. A company called the Givy Works, I think it was, George Townsend and Sons, I think, and they were effectively an engineering jobbing company. They would make component parts. They did things like knitting needles and stuff like that.
And sorry, where was this? In Enfield?
So this was no, not at all. No, they were based in Redditch, so just south of Birmingham. I think they were somewhere else before Redditch. Something End, but they were never in Enfield. So the Enfield name. So through the 1850s up until the sort of turn of the century, they did a number of things, and they got into doing bicycles. They got excited about doing bicycles. The son of one of the owners, I think, was very keen to create bicycles, and they started making bicycles. But at the same time, they were making component parts for the Enfield Rifle Company. So they never made whole guns, but they made component parts for the Enfield Rifle Company. And in a bit of sort of Victorian marketing, they decided to call one of their motorcycles the Royal Enfield. And I don't even think they ever had like a royal decree for it or anything. They just decided Royal Enfield would be a good name for a motorcycle to celebrate this contract of making component parts for Enfield rifles. And then that became the slogan. So they were called "Made Like a Gun" is still our slogan today. And so the first bike was produced in 1901. The first motorcycle. They produced some quadricycles before that, which were sort of original little engine with four wheels and a carriage seat at the front. But that making us the oldest brand in continuous production anywhere in the world. Oldest motorcycle brand, sorry. I think Peugeot might be out of claim because they've made bikes, but they've made scooters for a long time and not motorcycles. So we are the oldest motorcycle brand. We're older than Triumph. And the company went on, went from strength to strength, building motorcycles all the way through up to the First World War. Built a load of motorcycles for all the armies, I think, for everybody that on every side during the First World War, the Russians, the British, the French. There's some wonderful photos. They made an anti-aircraft motorcycle where there's a sidecar and a Lewis gun attached to it, and the guy would just lie back on the sidecar and shoot up. And then post-war, they were very well known for V-twins. They made V-twins. They made the biggest V-twin, an 1100cc motorcycle, 1148cc motorcycle, called the KX, 1140, sorry. And various other bikes, and they came up with the Bullet was first. The name for Bullet was first coined in the 30s as well, and that's the oldest motorcycle product brand name in continuous production as well, because that's never ceased production either. And then the Second World War came along. They again made lots of motorcycles for the army. Famously made a bike called the Flying Flea, which was this fantastic little parachute bike that went in a little cage and got dropped out the back of Dakotas. And we did a fantastic project with the Parachute Regiment a couple of years ago where we got to meet some of the guys that used them, and real honour, really amazing project to do. Hired a Dakota and put them up in the plane, and then landed them at Duxford and rode them out the back. It was brilliant. And then post-war, as I mentioned earlier, they came up. There was a little Skunk Works team that came up with this swinging arm suspension, this articulating suspension. And it made the bikes really good for off-road and for trials. Now, trials in those days weren't what it is today. A trials bike today is almost like a BMX. There's no fuel tank, and in those days it was almost like a rally, there were long navigation sections, and it was an endurance. It was a 6-day trial. There was the ISDT, which was the international 6-day trial, the Scottish 6 days, and the Colmore Cup. And they took a bike along to the Colmore Cup in '48, and they won it. And then over the next probably 10 years, completely dominated international trials riding, won gold medals in every category. It was an amazing character called Johnny Britton, who I got to meet, and he was a lovely gentleman of a chap, passed away a couple of years back now, and was a really lovely chap, Johnny. And there's brilliant photos of him with his flat cap on backwards and his goggles, and just brilliant stuff. And that was coincided, obviously, with Indian independence. So at this point, India is becoming independent from the British Empire, and there's partition. There's East Pakistan and West Pakistan, and then became Bangladesh. And obviously, there was a little bit of unpleasantness there, in some very understated Englishness there, between those two nations. And so the Indian Army were looking for a motorcycle for patrolling the border with Pakistan, and they wanted, obviously that's in the Hindu Kush and all the Himalayas and all that area. So they wanted a motorcycle that was rugged and dependable and could go off road and be used. And the Bullet was the bike for the job. So they put in an order for, I think, 600 or 800 motorcycles. But at the time, you couldn't import anything into India. Had to be a joint venture. India was still a closed currency today, and you couldn't import a product. So you had to have an Indian family, effectively Indian business, working with you. So there was Madras Motorcycles set up in a joint venture with Royal Enfield, and started making bikes initially as kit form, so importing them into India and building them as kit form, and then later they imported all of the tooling as the UK company updated their models. They shipped the old tooling over to India, and slowly it all became indigenized, and they made the whole bikes in India. And that carried on. They carried on making the Bullet 350 pretty much, as was standard as it was known, essentially for the next 60 years, without any real significant changes. There were updates and there were changes. The company in the UK went bust in 71, I think it was, 71, and they made a load more models in the meantime. They, all the way through the 50s, they did very well. And then I think in 65, Major Smith, who was the owner of the business at the time, died, and the business was sort of bought out by a guess venture capitalist now, and they asset stripped it. They sold off the factory for a housing estate, and there's still bits of the factory there today. There's still a bit of an industrial estate, and you can still see some of the original Redditch buildings there today. You can just make out what you could until a few years ago. Royal Enfield painted on one of the roofs. But so production stopped. It moved down to an old underground factory in Bath, or near to Bath in Stratford upon Avon, I think it is. And there was an underground factory there where they were making bikes, and then it ceased production when the whole of the British automotive industry collapsed, and the conglomerates that came along. So the government stepped in, and they put together all these motorcycle brands that had been fighting tooth and nail and dominated at one point, motorcycles was Britain's second largest export.
Right, I didn't realise that.
We were the world's largest motorcycle manufacturers by a country mile. And it all collapsed. Within 15 years. There's a brilliant book called Whatever Happened to the British Motorcycle Industry by a fellow called Bert Hopwood. And it should be on every MBA business course, because they went, as I say, from having this position of total dominance to being completely disappeared in 15 years. It's an amazing thing when you look at it. Wow. And so Royal Enfield went the same way, with Norton and Triumph and BSA and all of these once great brands, Velocet, Matchless,
BSA,
James.
what a cool brand.
Oh, absolutely. There are so many of them. Velocet is because of my grandfather's connection. I love that brand, and there are so many of them like that that were brilliant. Vincent, HRD,
Norton as well.
Gruff.
Actually, I think it was really
Norton's
cool,
an awesome brand. Really great brand. And arguably, Royal Enfield were never a racing brand. Norton were like racing pedigree. Velocet were racing. Royal Enfield were always that trials and a good steady workaday bike. Made some fantastic bikes. The original Interceptor was a brilliant bike, but it was too little, too late, and they weren't building enough of them. And there were little firsts all the way through. It was a little family-owned business that was innovative, and so the GT 250 was sort of the first official factory cafe racer. So say the Bullet was the first with an articulating swinging arm. I think it was the first bike with a cush drive. You know, they were doing lots of stuff that was interesting, but just sort of petered out and died. In India, the company carried on producing bikes almost in a vacuum. There wasn't competition, you know, and the bikes were owned by people of status, you know, by the army, by officers in the army, and then also by civil servants and people and that carried on up until about the 80s. And then in the 80s, the Indian government granted a bunch of new licenses and a whole bunch of new joint ventures were set up. So Hero with Honda and Kawasaki with Bajaj and Royal Enfield sort of was an anachronism. They were old bikes with old technology. They still had the gear change on the old British side, which is different to the Japanese, and the bikes were seen as being big and heavy and weren't as reliable. And the Japanese just came in with their, you know, catalogue of modern 125s and 100 cc's and completely dominated the market. And so Royal Enfield very nearly collapsed completely. And I think, again, even when we started working with them in 2005, I think, as I said, there was about 20,000 units a year. You know, and what happened was, I think there was just an alignment of all the I think there was a huge amount of serendipity. Sid Lal had a great vision for the brand. He knew the brand had legs and had longevity, and there was this 100-year-old business, but that needed really renovating and changing. And he saw the potential in the brand. He knew that the brand still had, you know, a hardcore of following. And if you could fix some of the problems and you could make it more accessible, then potentially you could grow the business. And that's what happened, you know. And they, when the UCE engine came out, which was the one that we worked on, the gear shift changes from the left to the right. The engine became a unit construction for the first time. So gearbox, up until that point, the gearbox was still a separate unit to the rest of the engine. And you know, the rest of the industry moved on 30 years previously, and Royal Enfield only changed that in 2008, I think it was. The engine came out. So, you know, it's been this, and I think an explosion of affluence in India. You know, India is this amazing booming economy. There's a huge emergence of a middle class with money to spend, massive transportation need, you know, and also a need to differentiate yourself from the crowd, to have something different and to be seen as, you know, having a big 4-stroke 350cc engine was seen as being, and the bike had a sound, it had a thump, it had, in some ways, there's some analogous to Harley in the way that they're seen in North America, you know. So there's a pride in the brand. There's, you know, and Indian consumers see it as being very much an Indian brand, and I think that's one of the really fascinating things. Is we talk about having British roots and Indian soul, and I think that really sums it up beautifully. I think that absolutely is what the company is all about. And for me, the thing that the potential there is that everybody around the world there's this huge explosion in the motorcycle market. It's 20-something million motorcycles a year in India at the moment. It's vast, absolutely huge. I mean, and to put that into context, absolutely insane. You know, put that in context, the whole of Europe's a couple of million a year. You know, so vast numbers, and all of the brands looking at India and Southeast Asia and saying that's where the market's at the moment. And so markets like Europe and North America are almost irrelevant backwaters now. And everybody's trying to break into India. So you see joint ventures with, you know, Harley have just signed up with Hero. You've got KTM with Bajaj. Triumph have just signed up with Bajaj. BMW are working with TVS. Everybody's trying to get into the Indian market. And they've all got these fantastic, you know, 90-year-old brands that they're trying to bring into the Indian market. But they don't have that kind of ingrained resonance that Royal Enfield has. They don't have that deep connection to the market. They don't have the supply chains. They don't have the fan base that we've got and the heritage, you know, that is built into our brand in India. And so within India, they're all trying to break in, and Royal Enfield has this established volume and economies of scale that come from that volume. The Indian brands, which make some great product, people like Hero and Bajaj, are trying to break out. They're trying to find new markets globally. But they don't have brands that mean anything outside of India. Whereas Royal Enfield has a brand that's got really strong nostalgic echo in Europe, in North America, in South Africa, in Australasia. And it means something. And even in markets like Brazil or Thailand, where they were never exported to those markets in the 50s and 60s, there's so much obvious heritage there and such a clear connection. You know, the bike has visually really not changed dramatically in that 50, 60 year period, that it's fully authentic. You know, people immediately buy into it, they get it, they understand it, they make that emotive connection with it. And you're not buying a Royal Enfield on a spec sheet. You know, you're not buying it on it doesn't. If you put it against another bike on a paper spec sheet, you wouldn't buy it. But you buy it because of the sound, the soul, the character, and because of the for me, it's that combination of accessibility, which you talked about previously. And by accessibility, I don't just mean price. Price is a component of that, but it's also, I can get on it, I can ride it, I can manage this. It's not. You know, you look around the world and there are some amazing motorcycles out there, but they're all just too good. They're all just.
Sorry to cut you off. A friend of mine visited me this evening, and he's got an MV Agusta, the F4, and
awesome
it's
bike.
Fucking beautiful. And it's like, I was like, if I bought something like this, could I get comfortable after like 6 months, you know? Because it's like, I'm pretty sure I would kill myself. But
or you buy yourself a BMW 1200 GS and then you're terrified to take it off road because it looks massive, and you think, how can I possibly? When you actually take them off road, they're brilliant. They're absolutely fantastic and they're easy to ride. But the perception is, you know, there's a 20 grand motorcycle there that is massive. It's a 1200 cc. It's tall. It's big. It's heavy. It's, you know, and so people just don't use them. They just don't ride them off road. And I think on everything we do, whether it's the Himalayan or the Interceptor or any of those products, it's all about that accessibility, that approachability. You know, bikes for me should be not throwaway. You should absolutely want them, and it's that combination of accessibility and desirability. You know, so you can't have one without the other. And I think that's the other thing with Royal Enfield is that you look at the Royal Enfield and think, that's beautiful. I love the way that looks. I love the way it sounds. I love the character it's got, the richness that it has, the authenticity. And I can have it. I can afford it. It's, you know, you can buy a 650 twin for €6,000. You know, that's accessible. People can afford that. They can do that. And I think that's been and it becomes a bit of a virtuous circle, because we can then get volume in India, which means we can drive down the price point. You know, so obviously the cost amortization of a component part, if you're spending 250 grand or 300 grand on tooling up a fuel tank, you know, you've got to then amortize that over the number of units you've got. So if you're a brand that's only making 50,000 bikes a year, and of one model you might be only making 10, 15,000 units. You got to amortize that. That becomes part of the on cost. For Royal Enfield, you know, we obviously we've still got to pay for it, but we're wearing tools out in 2 months. You know, so you're replacing a tool. You're so that the impact of the tooling cost is lesser, and it means that it's more about the part price and how you design the part, and that it's a fascinating difference, and it means that we've got the opportunity to offer bikes that are as good, you know, on a measurable level as competitor products that are at 3 or 4 grand more than we are, you know, and then that opens up all this opportunity for customization, because you then go, well, I could buy that, or I could buy that, get a 3-year warranty with it, and I can then spend some of that difference in making it my own, and you know, that's another big thing that we've established within my team, is that we've got a custom team, and that was something really early on. Adrian pushed it really heavily, and we started by the design team just building some customs of their own, and it's now grown into this huge. It's actually the biggest part of my budget now. The year that I sign off is our custom program. So we do, you know, we're flat track racing now. We've got custom builds happening all over the world with different custom builders in almost every market, and I love that. we create these bikes, and they're almost like blank sheets of paper, and we put them out to the world, and then see what people do with them. And I think for me that's one of the wonderful things about being a bike designer is that it's not done. You do see car customization, but not to the level of bikes, I don't think, or certainly not in the same way.
Not tastefully anyway. I mean, that's a significant difference. Yeah. Mark, before I forget, I don't want to let this go, but what were they doing before? What was Royal Enfield doing before you guys got on board, like full time, as it were?
So, I mean, the company was growing, and we were all part of this growth process. So the company was already, we really can't take credit for the growth. The growth was started long before we were there, and a few really key people that had fantastic insight. So the head of sales at the time, a chap called Shaji, recognised that if they copied where Maruti Suzuki were, the car company, where their distribution of dealerships, it would be a good rollout plan for the dealerships, and it just worked brilliantly. And building that dealer network, made a huge difference in India. Govin, the head of operations, I mean, they squeezed. So the original plant in which we call TVT, which stands for Tiruvattur, which is, I'm sure, pronounced badly, but it's right in the heart of Chennai. Chennai is the old Madras, and it's right in the heart of Chennai. And that was built in the 50s. That plant was built in the 1950s, and still looks a bit like a 1950s factory. And we were using that in full production right up until about 18 months ago. And that was only ever designed, I think, to do something like 50,000 units, and they squeezed 90,000 units a year out of that. And that got the company to the point where, I mean, we had at that point, so this is sort of 2014, we got to a point where there was a 9-month waiting list on the bikes.
Wow.
The customers were just going crazy for it. And we then opened, we got to a point, I guess, where there was enough capital that the investment and the growth in the business allowed for, the value add to the business allowed investment in a new factory.
But what I meant was, like, what were they doing design wise before you guys came on?
So there was in India, in Chennai, and at TVT, there was a design team that was being led by Siva Kumar. So we were still working with them as a consultancy all the way through.
Right. Okay.
But Siva was running the design team, so the Himalayan was designed entirely by Siva and his team. And it's a bit unfair because Pierre Blanche did a bit of work at Royal Enfield, not for very long, yes, but for a short while. And he gets credited for the Himalayan, and he had nothing to do with it. I don't even think he liked it very much. And it was Siva and Andy and my team, and they all worked on that bike and brought that to fruition. And I think the Himalayan for me is the other thing that all Royal Enfields have to have, which is a story. There has to be a purpose to it. It can't be a Me Too product. So, we should never look at the market and say, well, they're doing one of those, that's selling in volume, let's do one like that. It should always be, why are we doing this? Well, because it makes sense for Royal Enfield. So is it because there was one of these in our past? Is it something that we want to resurrect because it's right for the brand? Or in the case of the Himalayan, customers have been taking our bikes up to the Himalayas, and they've been the perfect bike for taking up to the Himalayas for 50 years. Let's build a bike specifically for doing that job. Let's build a bike that's designed around that task of riding all the way up to Uti or up to Leh or Manali or around, and doing those long journeys wherever they are, either the Southern Odyssey or the Himalayan Odyssey. And that was, that was the idea behind that. And I think all the bikes that we're working on today, and we've got a huge amount of stuff that's coming. So we've expanded massively the range of products that we've got coming. We've already spoken publicly about having 3 new engines in development and 15 or so new models, derivatives coming out, which is, hugely exciting. The next 2 or 3 years where we see all of that work coming to fruition and we see bikes coming out is going to be fantastic.
So
Mark,
some
of them should have already been out.
The company hasn't got too big that you can that you struggle to fight those sort of tendencies off to go like, okay, well, Yamaha are doing X, Y, and Z, let's go and copy that, because it seems like you've got quite a clear vision for a product strategist. And the tendency is for when companies get to a certain size, there are committees, kind of everybody wants to get involved in these sort of decisions.
I mean, I'd be lying if I was to say that there isn't. And certainly the business has changed very much over the last 5 years, but it's still a family-owned business. You know, it's still led by Siddharth, even though Siddharth has stepped back a little bit now. We've got a new CEO. Vinod is the CEO now. Sid is still passionately involved in the product, and he rides himself. I mean, when they made the Himalayan, Sid and his wife went off and rode around the Himalayas on one of the prototypes. You know, and to have a motorcycle business where the CEO, the owner, MD and CEO is a motorcyclist is a fantastic thing, and he's still very much involved in that. But yeah, you know, I mean, obviously the company is growing and changing, and they're definitely, you know, there's a lot more process and methodology being put in place all the time, and you know, I kind of miss some of the early days chaos, but equally, I think these things, you know, they have to happen. You have to evolve. Your company has to change.
For sure.
But one of the things that I love about Royal Enfield is it is a bunch of enthusiasts across the board. You know, I mean, it doesn't help with my track credentials in that you know, I've always thought I was a reasonably quick road rider. I'm rubbish off road, but I'm a reasonably quick road rider until you go and work at somewhere like the UK Tech Centre, where I must be at least 30 people are quicker than me. You know, we've got obviously you've got all of the professional test riders that are all ex-racers. You know, people like Paul Young that work for us that are ex Grand Prix riders. And all of the test riders in between, and then you've got just a bunch of the engineers that have, you know, ridden in BSB or have had tests for certain things, and you know, just across the board, it's just kind of petrolhead heaven. You know, everybody that is there loves bikes, and I mean, not everybody, I guess, 50% of the people, which is still a huge number when you think about it. You know, and I really love that about working at Royal Enfield. I think it's a great part of working for the business is that there is that enthusiasm for the product and the brand. I'm just going to need to plug in and just make sure that's. Just give us 2 seconds because my battery's just about to die. There we go. Yeah, you know, I mean, and whether that's my team or, you know, and I mean, I've got guys in the team that are Ed, who's my concept engineer, is a drift car racer. And he's got a Mark II Escort with that the purists hate because he's got a Nissan Turbo in it, I think it is, and yeah, he's just fully loose and leery and brilliant, and yeah, it's that and that hasn't changed. We've managed to keep that. There is that feeling of you know, and then obviously COVID has had an impact in that we haven't been able to get together over the last year or so. But you know, that's definitely one of the nice things about working at Royal Enfield, certainly.
Mark, as somebody that is not a bike owner yet, that likes, if I was looking for something like a Triumph Bonneville, what Royal Enfield model would you recommend to me?
I mean, the Bonneville's a great bike. Firstly, I'm not going to knock them. They make some great bikes. I'm obviously going to say the Interceptor's the bike to have there. You know, that's our. So our Interceptor is a 650 twin. I said I could be a motorcycle salesman. It's a 650 twin, so it's developing similar performance. It's a little bit lighter. I really like the way it changes direction. So I feel it's got this beautiful neutral handling that is great for good riders and novices. So it's got this wonderful characteristic that if you go into a corner too hot and you grab a fistful of front brake, you know, you can keep it, and it doesn't change direction. It doesn't sit up or you know, it just holds its line. If you need to tighten that line up at all, you just give it a bit more and it just goes in, and it's just a lovely, pleasurable bike to ride, and it's no more than it needs to be. You know, it's only 47 brake horse, but it's 52 newton meters of torque, and it's delivering all of that. It's about 80% of the torque is at about 2,500 RPM. So you get this lovely smooth torque wave. It's got this beautiful burble. You know, on the overrun, the noise is fantastic. Everywhere you go, people just want to look at it and they get it. It's a lovely, lovely bike. And so yeah. I mean, honestly speaking, I always say sometimes I think I'm the worst person for product strategy because honestly, the best bike ever is the bike you're riding. It doesn't really matter what it is. Motorbikes are just brilliant, you know. I mean, and I sound a bit like the guy at the fast show, but they really are just fantastic. And it kind of doesn't matter. I mean, we did a bit of a thing in Bali a couple of years ago, where we took a bunch of the team over to Bali and were working. And did a bunch of, and we all hired scooters and we went riding off around the island on scooters, and we had so much fun that day, you know. And I always say, if you could bottle that, if you could get an essence of what that was, you know, that, and they were just on little cheap scooters. It's the fun of being on two wheels, that feeling of freedom and movement that you get. That it's just, you're just so more connected than you are in a car. You know, I mean, I love cars as well. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, bikes are just a much more visceral and connecting experience. And at risk of waxing lyrical, they're kind of almost meditative. You know, you disappear off into a world of your own on a bike. You know, I mean, if you've ever read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, but that's essentially what he's talking about there, is that sort of meditative state of riding a bike, especially over a long distance. And you just see the world changing around you, and you can feel, you smell it, and you can feel it. You get, you know, you go through dappled tree light, and you get wafts of hot and cool air moving over you, and you're moving through it. You know, especially if you go to somewhere like India, which is beautiful. I mean, if you get outside of the cities, it's an amazing place to ride a motorcycle. And you go.
Have you done any Have you done any big trips like that on your own?
Not. I mean, I've ridden down to the south of France. I've done
on your own.
We did from yeah. Well, a couple of us. So
wow.
Me and a mate rode down to the south of France took a GT and an Interceptor and did the length of France in a day. And we did it all by the back roads. I've got this wicked app on the phone that's called Calimoto that basically shows you the twistiest routes. So we stayed off all of the main roads and just did the whole thing on the twisties, and did it all in, I think it was about 13 hours riding solid, and then spent 5 days riding around the south of France. There's a big festival called Wheels and Waves, which happens down there, which is just it's a brilliant few days. There's talk that it will be back on this year. I'm hopeful. We might run down that again.
When is it?
It was the end of the summer last year, or the year before, I guess. It was, I want to say September time, I think. I don't know what time they're doing it this year. I don't know whether they've changed it at all this year or not. But yeah, we rode down and did that. And I've done, so I don't know what point I decided this, but at some point I said, well, I keep going to India, and I'll go to India when we could travel, maybe once a month. In fact, more than that. Which has its negatives. It means I'm not around the kids as much, and I have to say that the lockdown has been good for that. I've been able to spend time with the boys, which has been lovely. But I was going over to India, as I say, maybe even once every couple of weeks at times. But we would go and visit consumers. We'd go and meet customers, and we'd fly into a city, get a taxi, go to a hotel, then get a taxi and go and meet the customer and do the focus group, and then get back into a taxi and go to the hotel. And I was just like, we're a motorcycle company. Why on earth are we doing this? This is crazy. So we started basically planning rides where we would ride and go and find a customer. So we would do a journey where we would pick out, say, 5 or 6 dealerships, and we'd stop at the dealerships on the way. And you learn so much more by riding in the environment, riding on the roads that people ride on, meeting people. We went over to do some research, and we went to a dealership, and I said, I want to meet some of the more rural customers. You know, can you show me some of the customers that aren't in the big cities? Because we always meet the big cities, and they're always the more middle class. And so he said, yeah, I'll take you. We'll go. And we went to meet a couple of dairy farmers. And we went to this dairy farm, and it was an amazing place. It was like I guess it would have been like an 18th century sort of cattle shed, you know, and they were all being hand milked. They were all being milked with a guy, you know, 5 really hench guys just hand milking these cattle. And we turned up, and these fellas were, they'd not seen the Interceptor at all at that point. I was riding an Interceptor. We had a couple of Himalayans with us and stuff, and they were looking at it, and they were really interested. And and they were fully Royal Enfield mad. The family had, I think, there were like 16 bikes amongst them between the family. I think there was one cousin had a KTM, and he was seen as being as the black sheep of the family. But everybody else said they were fully Bulleteers. And this the most senior chap in the family said, "What's this?" And I said, "Oh, it's the new Royal Enfield." And he said, "I said, Royal Enfield, it's got 2 exhausts." I said, "Yeah, it's a twin. It's got 2 cylinders." Oh, I've not seen that before. So he said, so I did that, and as if have a go, as in hear the engine. He just jumped on and boom, he was gone, disappeared. And he was gone for a good 10 minutes, which felt like an hour. And we were sort of beginning to get, I was like, is he coming back? I don't know what's happening here. And he finally came back, and he was like, "This is amazing. This is incredible." And it was just this immediate connection. There was this immediate... another anecdote. So before we worked at Royal Enfield, but whilst we were still working for them, when we did the Continental 535, so we did the cafe race of the GT 535 for Royal Enfield as Xenophya. But I went over to India and we did a bunch of design research in India for that bike, which actually didn't sell very well. Our research was wrong, but it didn't sell so well. But we were in Delhi, and we were interviewing a bunch of guys there, and I would start each session by saying, "Can anybody tell me, do you know what a cafe racer is? Can you tell me anything about the genre and what it is?" And normally people had a clue. They were fairly well genned up, and they would say it's like a retro sports bike. But this one guy in Delhi was... Cafe racers started in the 1950s in Britain, and they started around the Hanger Lane Gyratory, and they were famous for being between da-da-da. And I was just like, wow, this guy knows his stuff. And when I looked at him, he had his phone up, and he was reading the Wikipedia entry.
Okay.
And I thought exactly that. I was like, oh, it's cheating. And then I stopped and thought, well, hang on a minute. No, he's not cheating. I wasn't there. I don't remember it. Yeah, my dad was into it. My dad was that era. And my dad's, told me little bits of stories and stuff. But my experience is exactly the same as his. It's reading books, looking at pictures. Mostly it's through things like websites and Instagram and Facebook and whatever else. It's the social media that we all see it through. And so his experience of cafe races is as connected as mine. And the world we live in today, those trends are global immediately. So you make a brat bike or a bobber or a cafe race and it's immediately resonates and is relevant around the world. And yeah, there are slightly different environments. And it's, we've done focus groups, and focus groups are great, but the best bit is when you finish and you go outside and you say, "Can I have a look at your bikes?" And then it's like being 17 again, and you're all looking around, and they're showing you the modifications they've made, and then somebody starts doing a wheelie, and it's just, it's a universal thing. That passion is globally universal. I don't think it goes away wherever you are, and that's the opportunity as well, is if you can create product that speaks to that kind of that essential core of what it means, that can work in multiple markets. And we have bikes that appeal to the same product, appeals to totally different demographics, totally different socioeconomic groups, but the thing they're buying is still the same. The what makes them excited and what makes them love it is still the same. And that's great, and wherever you go, and I'm fortunate and I get to go to quite a few of these sort of bike events, around the world. We've been at Sturgis, we've been at a couple in Brazil. Royal Enfield have a massive event every year called Ridermania, which is this brilliant. I mean, if you've ever got a chance to go to Goa, Goa's a wonderful place anyway. It's this beautiful, slightly Portuguese-influenced town on the southwest coast of India, just below Mumbai. I say just below, 3 days ride below Mumbai. And riders ride in from all over India, all the way from the top, all the way from Delhi, all over. And it's a 4-day event, which is becoming more of a 5 or 6 day event even as people arrive. Beer is like 100 rupees, which is like a quid, 100 euro for 3 bottles of beer. And it's just carnage. It's just amazing. It's just, all these people with this shared passion just rock up in this one place. It's like a sort of a music festival, but there's also bike racing, there's sort of grass track racing and trials riding and concourse and beer drinking competitions and arm wrestling competitions, and just It's just an amazing energy for 4 days. It's better than Christmas. It's like the best thing ever. I'm so gutted it didn't happen this year. And again, it's the same thing. You go there and you realise it doesn't matter where you're from and what your background is and what colour your skin is and what your beliefs are. And there's this one thing. And I feel like I'm evangelising a bit now, but it's just...
No, you carry on. You evangelise all you want.
But that's, that for me is what it's all about. That's the bit that I love about it is that whole, just that shared experience, of what makes it cool.
Mark, I as you know, I recently had Martin Longmore on the podcast, and he's spent a good number of years designing bikes himself, and he said something really interesting which I never previously considered, but that he actually finds designing bikes similar to he associated more with interior design versus,
absolutely, yeah,
which I never really thought about at all.
Yeah, absolutely, because you don't have that homogeneous. So bikes are I always think of bikes as being a bit like a chess set. I remember in our first year at uni, we got asked to design either chocolates or chess pieces or both. And I remember thinking, I don't get why we're doing this. This is rubbish. I want to design bikes. Why am I doing this? And it was that whole design language, that how do you get a consistency, a harmony between all the parts, which are largely disparate. And on a bike, there's so many bits that you don't have control of, So on a car, you don't see the suspension components. You might see a caliper. You definitely don't see the oil filter. You definitely don't see the radiator, the exhaust system, and all of that stuff is coming from different suppliers, different places. So a bike designer's job is to try and bring all of that stuff together in one coherent, effort that feels like it's a thing. And you don't get that singular form. I think car design is and I don't know, I'm not a car designer. I've never really, other than at uni, I've never designed cars, and I've got a huge amount of respect for it. I don't want to in any way seem like, but you get it's a single statement, it's a single thing. Whereas motorcycle design is this sort of disparate collection of surfaces and component parts that you've got to try and make hang together. You've got to try and get some sort of uniform feel to it. And it's that whole chess set, that you can have 3 different chess sets and you can mix all the parts together. And although the queen is a different form factor to the pawn and to the knight, you could still sort them back out into their individual chess sets because they've all got that connected design language. And bike design is all about that. It's all about trying to make that. And the other thing, and some of my ex-employees will laugh at me this because they always think it's a stupid thing to say, but it's a really intimate product. Like you interface with a bike, you basically put your crutch up against it and wrap yourself around it. You just don't do that with other products. And so you can't design it fully in CAD. You can't create and I know you can't, I don't believe you can do a car very successfully by not seeing it either. As soon as it comes off the tube, it becomes a different thing. But on a bike, you really have to sit on it. You've got to interface with it. You've got to think you're moving. You're a third of its weight. So as you move around on the bike, you have to be able to. In a car, you kind of sat in a fixed position. On a motorcycle, you're shifting your weight all over the bike all the time. You're climbing off the seat and you're hanging off depending on the type of bike you're riding. And so all of that has to be incorporated and thought about. And so it's much more like interior design than exterior design.
What does that process normally look like? I mean, in terms of bike designers, like bike design. What does a bike designer do on a day, your average day as a bike designer? I know that you are not doing that anymore, but you are well versed in that and you are familiar with it.
Yeah. So, the process steps are not dissimilar to any other form of industrial design. And I think one of the things I've always loved about bike design, and as I said to you before, I was already mad keen on being a motorcycle designer because of motorcycles, but it just so happens that for me, it's ended up being in a really nice balance of so as I understand it, and I've never done either of these things properly, but if you're an industrial designer working on kettles and teapots and drills, I just can't get excited about those things. They don't turn me on enough to be excited about them. But B, I think you kind of do it all. You maybe have an engineer that you work with, but you design it all. If you're a car designer, the division of labour is over a multitude of people. It's a huge team.
Mm-hmm.
You've got interior, exterior, clay modelers, surface modelers, all these different departments, all these divisions of labour. On a motorcycle project, you typically got one designer. You might have two. And it means that as a designer, you have absolute control. You might have an alias model that will work with you, and you might have a clay modeler that will work with you, but you still typically get involved and do a bunch of the clay modeling yourself, and you still get, you're still doing a bunch of the CAD work yourself as well. So there's still at least concept CAD, first draft of CAD is done by the designer. The final A-class surfaces might be done by an A-class modeler, but typically, designer will start. But as I say, the process is fairly similar. The designer will start with a brief. An idea. There'll be some benchmark bikes. We'll set out a process of what we call QFD, which is based very loosely about the sort of Japanese quality function deployment principles, but we don't follow it fully. But effectively, a way of taking customer verbatims, defining attributes around those verbatims, and then benchmarking them against competitor products and understanding where do you want to fit alongside those attributes. So you say, So again, going back to this thing of not saying it has to have a 300mm brake disc, but actually saying it needs really good braking with great feel, just like that one over there. That bike there does that really well, so we want to be as good as that. And then it's down to the engineers and to work out what that means. But that's so we set targets for every single attribute you can think of, whether that's visual, whether that's sound, audible, comfort, ride handling, quality, performance, acceleration, long distance, mileage, blah, 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 all that stuff. That then gets given to the design teams. And the industrial designer will work with the concept engineer team, they'll scheme out a basic layout, because, of course, and again, this is true for cars, I guess, as well as it is bikes, but the proportions of the bike are defined by what it does. So if you think a motocross bike looks the way it does because it needs ground clearance, it needs long suspension travel, that means you need space underneath the sump, that means you've got to lift that up, you need to be able to move about the saddle, so you've got a long elongated saddle. So much of it is defined by the function of the bike. A cruiser is about being in a much more comfortable, sat down into the bike, somewhere you can sit in a comfortable position for hours on end. A sports bike is about being able to shift your weight over the front end and get all your weight as you're braking, try and force as much weight into the front tyre. And that absolutely defines the proportion of the stance of the bike. So understanding what the bike is and what it's trying to do is critical. So you work with concept engineering. It's a bit of a chicken and egg. There'll be an element of the designer sketching and saying this is what it could be and this is where I think it should be, and the engineer answering that and then coming back and saying, well, I think we should do this, and there's a dialogue that needs to happen. It's a conversation between the two that happens with dirty fingers and ballpoint pens and Wacom tablets and CAD software, both engineering software and industrial design software, and you slowly get to a point where you built a direction. So we go through a series of sketch checks, which I guess is the same in every studio. We go through a series of sketch reviews where we refine down what we want. And I always think about it a bit like a camera coming into focus. It starts off all blurry and it just slowly becomes more and more focused. Right. And you have that sort of double diamond thing where you go wide, you do lots of things, you then come into a given direction, and then on that given direction you then go wide again and then narrow it down. We then build a CAS model, so we build a model in CAD, and we'll use all sorts of bits of old model from elsewhere, bits of stuff we download off the internet, mesh models, NURBS models, whatever we can get, but to lash up a proportion and a feeling that can get sketched over and used again and again to try and build that stance and that proportion, and that then gets evolved with the concept engineering side of it. We might build what we call a character bike. So we'll build take component parts off other motorcycles and build a bike that gives us a sense of what that bike means or where the targets want to be. And that can also help to influence the design team. We try and get the design team to be part of the process. So they are part of the ride that we do to define the attributes, and they come along to some of the consumer research and meet the customers, because I think it's really important that everybody is involved within that. And then from the CAS, we'll cut a clay. So we still work fully in clay. We've got a full CNC, although typically we cut component parts and assemble them on the bike, but then hand work the clay. And, whatever it takes, clay, rapid prototype parts, CNCing bits out of aluminium, out of model board, sticky back plastic, bottle tops, string, whatever it needs to create an initial representation. That clay model gets refined, and again, there's an ongoing process of refinement, iteration. We scan it, we put it back into the CAD environment, we remodel over it, recreate it. That then gets shared again with the engineering teams. That goes through a whole process. I mean, and this is to design a bike is a 3-year process, 3 or 4 year process. It takes a bunch of people.
Mark, what I'm really interested to know is, like, for example, if you sitting, you creating something from scratch, okay, and like if you take interior design, for example, if you sit on a seat, you've got like what they call a comfort line. So you'll get given a section, and that's something that you should try and adhere to, and then eventually, it gets tweaked along the way and whatnot. I imagine that there might be certain parameters like that within bike design as well. But like, for example, if you're creating a new tank, it might have it's going to have a brand new feel, and then it's like ergonomics must be a really, really strong driving factor in that. Like, if the designers created a volume, does everybody like different people in the studio just come and sit on the clay and they go, oh, this is irritating my leg over here, let's take a bit off? Is that kind of how it works?
That's a big chunk of that process. I mean, it depends absolutely on the type of bike and what you're trying to do with it. It depends on the final usage of the bike will change how you approach that. But absolutely, that happens in the studio. Equally, at the same time, as I say, we've got mule bikes that we build. So we build working prototypes, and we'll rapid prototype the back end of a tank and stick that on so we'll make a metal coffin tank. We call them just a welded up fabricated square box that will sit at the front, but you'll rapid prototype the rear portion of the tank, and then test riders will go and do ride evaluations with that, and they'll feed back and give you their input, and you'll squabble a bit over it and change a bit, and again, it's an iterative process that moves all the way through. Okay. And we get to a stage about 12 months in where we have effectively sort of the end of concept or where you move into a sort of design for manufacture phase. So all the way through, you're thinking about design for manufacture, but you move to a point where you've got a hard model, as we refer to it, which is typically a bike that looks like a bike. So in the studio, you look at that and evaluate that, and it looks and feels like it's all painted. People come up and break bits off because they don't realise they're a model. It happens all the time. Don't sit on that; it's too late. Broken. So you've got a visual that looks and feels exactly like the bike, and then we've got a mule bike, which is like a fully adjustable bike where you can change all of the geometry. And that rides like the bike will ride, and at that point you say, okay, so we know what it's going to look like, we know how it's going to handle, and that's at the point you say, okay, that's where we're going forward with it. Okay. But it is completely a conversation between all of the different disciplines, and so there's power training there, there's and obviously we style engines, and I know again that does happen in the car world, but will crankcases have industrial design input on them? Cylinder heads, barrels, all of them have an input that is connected to industrial design. The exhaust routing has industrial design input on it because it's visible. You can see it there. It's a thing, and so it has to be a collaboration between it. And there's always some healthy conflict, and I think that's important. I think because everybody within a design team has different personalities. The reason you have industrial design, if you go back to the 50s, they didn't have industrial designers. Everybody was an engineer. But the reason that you have these different functions within the team is because effectively we're all on a spectrum somewhere, from engineer at one end to artist at the other, and we're all on a spectrum, and different designers are more or less at the visual end and more or less at the pragmatic functional end, and the same with engineers. You get engineers that get it, that understand the form, and others that just look at you blankly when you say, no, that really has to not do that. And so it's making sure that you've got a good blend. And I think naturally, depending on where you sit, you're going to have different priorities. You're going to see the world through a different lens. You're going to apply a different filter to it. So, if you're an industrial designer, the likelihood is you'll say, I care less about, how practical this is. I don't care if the tank's got 20 miles worth of range, but I really care that it looks beautiful and I want this. If you're an engineer, and again, this is all a massive generalization because there are plenty that flip over and there is that big blend in the middle. But you've also got people that are just looking at, I don't care what it looks like. I want it to be as functional and form follows function. And form is function. Form doesn't follow function. Form is function. Form has a massive job to do. It has to semantically tell you what the bike does. And especially the semantics of a motorcycle are really important. That when you walk up to it, looking at a bike, what it's for and what it's going to do. And again, you do get that in the car world. You get, a two-seater sports car tells you something different than a off-road vehicle. But I think that maybe that crossover is a bit more, or a bit more subtle. Whereas motorcycles really are driven. But as I say, the form is function. The form has to do that job of telling you what the bike's about, and without it, we would never sell a bike. It's always the number one thing whenever we survey with customers. We say to them, why do you buy this bike? And it's always because of the way it looks, first and foremost. So it's a massively important part of it. And so it has to be that conversation of, we did a presentation on the little Meteor that we just launched recently, the new 350. And I put in there some slides that were live. They weren't pretends. They were examples of my design team talking to the engineering team. And they were, pictures where somebody scribbled over a CAD screenshot saying, can we move this here? And can we just tweak that line there and pull that there? Can the frame do that? And, because it all matters. Every little bit counts. And so it is that dialogue. And we're pretty lucky at Royal Enfield, I think. As I say, there's always a bit of creative conflict. There's always a little bit of tension, but that's not a bad thing, actually. That's a good thing.
No, yeah. Mark, we've been going for like almost 3 hours, so I guess we should probably fucking wrap this up. But it's been amazing. It's just fascinating, the whole process. It's new for me. I didn't know anything about Royal Enfield. I feel educated on it as well, and I feel a lot more educated on bike design. And your passion for everything is just it's insatiable. So I think I guess like we could probably wrap things up by asking you like what advice you would give for a young person wanting to become a bike designer.
Think long and hard about it. It's not it's a tiny little industry with not many people in it and not a ton of opportunities. So you've really got to want it. It's not a thing that you just think, oh, I might do this, and you know that when you talk to bike designers, they've all got that, and I can tell. I look at a portfolio straight away and it's just obvious whether somebody's got it or not. And I don't know how to articulate what it is, but it is very clear. So I think the first thing is that, it's not just something you turn your hand to. I think you've really got to get it and got to want it. But equally, I think tenacity is massively important. And I think I said before that there is definitely a fine line between being a dreamer and, kind of just not connected to reality and showing grit and determination and sticking with it and getting there. And I think, obviously all of the practical stuff is there. So, learn all you can, pick up as much as you can. Don't ever sit there saying somebody hasn't taught me something. Teach yourself, be entrepreneurial, go out. If you look at something you like, think, well, how have they done that? How did they achieve that? How did they do that sketch? How have they made that model? Learn the processes. There's nothing that can't be learned. You don't need somebody to do it for you. And even if they try to, they probably won't teach it properly anyway. So you've got to learn it for yourself. Also, just accept there's a bunch of luck around it all as well. I guess you make your own luck, but equally, we've been lucky. We definitely, you've heard the phrase "fake it till you make it." I mean, there's definitely an element of that in all of it, and I'm sure my colleagues will be going, "Yeah, definitely, he's doing that." But and I do end up with a bit of imposter syndrome at times. I do find myself thinking, I don't know that I'm fully qualified to be doing this, but actually, nobody is. Everybody's learning. Everybody throughout their careers are learning, and I don't think that ever stops. And so don't ever feel like you can't. I think for me that's the thing is go and get a good degree, but become a bike design nerd. Like sit in front of the telly drawing bikes all day long and just practice. And I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is that now I don't do it as much. It takes me a lot longer to get up to speed again. I mean, I recently just did some sketches for my own little custom project that I might do on one of my bikes, and it took me a while because I haven't done it for a while. It's something that you get from doing it. So practice, learn the software, and the other thing I think is learn the product. Know the anatomy of a motorcycle. Know what all the bits do, because it's all about the bits. So know what a front fork does. Don't just draw. Don't use the crutch of novelty. I see that a lot with young students trying to do motorcycle concepts, where they change the bit at the front and don't do a conventional fork. So they do a swinging arm front end and a swinging arm rear end, single-sided front and rear. And then the bit in the middle is just sort of a funny shape. And the crutch of novelty of the arrangement kind of misses the point of the actual bit of the design. And I don't see any design in it. I just see kind of the novelty of the layout. Flash. And actually exactly. The real ability is to be able to take all those bits that exist and pull them together into a coherent design. That's when I'm looking at portfolios. I'm looking at people that can do that, and that can take an idea from a beautiful sketch, which I mean, there's no getting away from it. You've got to be able to draw it. It's got to look beautiful. You've got to get people excited. You've got to persuade people with your sketches. But equally, you've got to be able to take it from that sketch and realise it. You've got to be able to look at it and go, can I manufacture this? Can I draft this? Is this going to be, what material am I going to make this out of? And all of that is really important. So try and learn as much of that as you can, I think. That's not one line of advice, is it?
No, but that's more. That's great. I mean, it's and I think it's great advice as well, because both of those things are really relevant. And for me, quite often when I ask that question, you kind of either get one or the other, and it's like you suggest like it might be biased towards one way, saying that you shouldn't just be drawing all day long. You should be thinking about how things are made, and there's or vice versa. It's like it's great that how all of this works, but you need to really focus on your craft of the art of seduction, so to speak. So I think it isn't one or the other. It's both, right?
It is. I mean, one of the things there are bits of this corporate life that I still find tough. I've come from being self-employed and doing what we like when we like for so long, and I have to do all the things that a big corporate organisation has to do. We have to do the HR things and the reviews, and one of the questions that I constantly come back to is, how do you create some sort of performance appraisal for a designer? Because you can, and it's the bottom line is it's both. It's, yes, you can say these are all the things you need to do. We have to get this bike made in this time frame. You've got to get that clay model finished. You've got to get that cab model out. You've got to deliver those sketches on time. You've got to do everything on time. But equally, you can achieve all of that if a customer doesn't walk into a showroom and say, I need that thing in my life, I've got to have it. You've not achieved what you're supposed to achieve. And so, how do you rate a designer's work, well, it's on both of those things. They've got to deliver. They've got to do it on time and in full. They've got to get both of them right. And I think, it's no good saying, oh, spend time sketching if you don't know how to get it to the end, because otherwise you're then just relying on somebody else to deliver it and it falls over. But equally, if you can't create that thing that people get, look at it and think that's desirable, I've got to have that, then ultimately you've just made another thing.
Yeah. Very good. Mark, I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I'm sure many people will. I've been hounded for getting a bike designer on for a while, and I think that we got more than what we bargained for. So thank you very much.
No problem. I'm fairly sure you're gonna have to do some editing. There's an awful lot of waffling.
There's no
there,
editing, dude. It's unfiltered. It was like start and stop.
Right.
So yeah, it's
Blimey.
long format.
Okay.
So no, but that's good. Nothing can be taken out of context. But yeah, dude, that was really cool, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much.
Great.